the section where we have 4 presentations for the lightning talks. And I think we have 3 of our 4 presenters are online and waiting. Oh no, Champika is there as well. Excellent. So what I'll do is I'll actually hand straight over to Bart to speak about cyberproofing small and medium businesses, a small step with a big impact. So a security thread for us. That's good to see. So Bart, you're online and you can share your slide deck when you're ready.
Great, thank you, Terry. I will indeed try to do it right now. I hope you can all see that. Thanks and good afternoon, and thanks for joining this lightning talk titled Cyberproofing Small and Medium Businesses, a Small Step with a Big Impact. My name is Bart Hoven, as you mentioned, Terry. I'm leading the cyber capacity building efforts at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is an independent public policy think tank based in Canberra. In the next few minutes, I wanted to share some initial findings from running a tool called .au check, which we've been running for the past 6 months or so. And for those of you who attended last year's NetThing, that's where I gave the first preview of the tool. And in April this year, we launched it officially and publicly. So AU check is a free tool that allows owners of websites and email domains, users and customers to check if their website or email domain with their standards are up to date. And some of these standards include the protocols that enable the establishment of encrypted connections, the security of regular website applications, such as online forms and shopping carts, the security of the domain name by checking whether a cryptographic record is available and correctly configured, whether the authenticity marks in your email are applied well, which help against phishing attacks, and finally, whether the use of IPv6, the Internet Protocol version 6, is included. So why this focus on cybersecurity and on Australian small and medium enterprises? As we all know, small businesses are most vulnerable to cybersecurity incidents because often they simply lack the time, the resources, and sometimes the skills to prepare for or defend against a cyber intrusion, or to mitigate and remedy any consequences. And that is why my organization, ASPI, supported by the .au domain administration, or AUDA, created this tool, AU check, as I mentioned, to really kind of help businesses quickly and easily test the security of their websites and email domains. The tool is intended to empower businesses to improve their internet security practices. On the slide, you see the latest kind of overview from the threat assessment produced by the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. And in the middle, you kind of see where most of the reported incidents are coming from. So they affect small organizations, sole traders, medium-sized businesses, schools, and contributors in the supply chain. They are among the entities most affected by cybercrime, as well as state-sponsored cyber operations. As we all know, cyber criminals seek financial gain or even sensitive business information, as well as personal data, as we've kind of observed in the last couple of weeks, obviously. And even if these companies may not be the direct targets of cyber incidents, many businesses may fall victim due to the spread of ransomware or the sheer size of a data breach. Now, in combination with this reporting from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, as you probably also know very well, is that the 2020 Australian Cybersecurity Strategy is where the government instructs all businesses to take their responsibility for securing their products, services and supply chains, and for protecting their customers from known cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But there's a great emphasis on own responsibility for small businesses to take care of their own cybersecurity. So then how can a sole trader or a micro, a small business, or even a medium enterprise be empowered to protect their online presence, their data, systems, and transactions? We believe that an important answer to that question lies in the architecture of the internet. As you probably also know, much better than I do, is that historically the community of technicians that developed internet standards, which include critical security features, are kind of really kind of centerpiece to security of the internet. And let's say they trickle down as well to the Australian internet through the various standards that are either adopted in Australia or less so adopted in Australia. I think most of them are reflected in the Australian government or ANASD's information security manual. And you see some of the standards that we adopted for .eu check listed on the left-hand side, and they are referenced from the Australian government's information security manual. But obviously, the uptake of standards doesn't happen automatically. Among other things, it requires public and private sector leadership, some foresight, but also definitely some ambition and some proactiveness, as well as demand from the market. So what's then the current situation in what I would call kind of the Australian internet? So to get a sense of where we're at, we tested the website and email domains for a cross-section of Australian agencies and businesses, ranging from federal government to critical industry sectors and online trading retailers. So I'm just going to show you kind of a snapshot of the results, which is for the moment just a small and random sample of sectors, but I think they offer some interesting findings. So here you see kind of three sectors: federal government, some companies from the ASX 100, and a group of internet service providers, the major telcos. So you see here the percentages that connect to what extent they fully comply with each of those standards. So for instance, for federal government, 12% of the websites that we tested fully comply with the HTTPS, so the encryption and authenticity of the domain requirements that are considered critical or really important. That's on the email side, even less. You kind of see that encryption across email is in a pretty poor state. But you also see that on the government side, anti-phishing standards like DMARC, DKIM, and SPF have really taken an uptake over the last couple of years. And you see that reflected in the scores. Across the ASX 100, as well as for the ISPs, you also probably realize that scores are not super impressive. Now, that said, I think there are a couple of takeaways here. I think one is that email security standards are implemented more enthusiastically than website security standards. And I think that's to be correlated with the many cyber incidents that relate or originate from spoofing and fake email messages. Secondly, which I think is worrying, that the encryption of those connections for websites as well as mail domains is pretty poor, given that kind of encryption and authenticity is such so important. Now, I have to say that kind of the percentage score does not say that they are unprotected or unencrypted. There are just a few instances of that situation, but it's mostly a matter of important elements, kind of the chain of authenticity or the chain of encryption that are missing or are ill-configured. Thirdly, I think it's noteworthy that website security options are hardly implemented at all across the sectors represented here. So these are features that address things such as cross-site scripting, where a malicious scripts are injected into otherwise benign and trusted websites. Clickjacking, where a visitor is tricked to click a button or a link that leads to another malicious page. Or man in the middle, or man in the browser attacks, or session hijacking, where an attacker gains unauthorized access to an existing session, stealing a alleged session token. So I think it's quite important and quite telling that website security options are hardly configured at all on any Australian website or email domain. Fourthly, and this has been a particular kind of thing that we have experienced throughout the project, is that DNSSEC or DNS security has been really a hard sell in Australia. We only see some .gov.au domains that have their domain name signed. And I think despite general acceptance that hardening the domain name system is really important and required, the community in Australia, definitely compared to some other nations, has been quite reluctant to embrace DNSSEC as a step in that chain to hardening the DNS system. And I think that's an important step to address as well. Finally, on a, I think, more positive note, we see quite some attention to implementing the basic email security standards, as I mentioned before. And that's really, really tremendously important and shouldn't underestimate it. At the same time, if we're looking kind of at sectors outside of federal government with scores around 40%, that's still far below what we should aim for. So I think that's kind of a bit of a mixed message, of course. And I think compared to other economies that we looked at, comparable economies as well, Australia is performing below what should be expected from what I think is a mature and digital nation. So a few examples, a few options, I think, to consider in kind of moving this debate forward. For instance, should we perhaps encourage leadership by the big movers and shakers in this world much more? And this includes particularly the telcos and internet service providers. In other economies, we've seen that kind of their proactive uptake of internet security standards, as we discussed here, can make almost an instant and significant positive difference. And obviously also there is a role for federal and state governments to play potentially a bigger leadership and advocacy role, and that includes the ACSC through cyber.gov.au. I think potentially there may be a more prominent role for Standards Australia as the national standardization body in encouraging and incentivizing greater uptake across industry in cooperation with the likes of AUDA, the network operator groups, as well as representatives of the small and medium business community. And finally, we would like to encourage owners of websites and email domains, whoever uses them for business or for commerce, to have an informed conversation with their service provider. This includes hosting providers, obviously, email clients, as well as domain registrars. And using .aucheck.com.au may help having that conversation and starting that conversation. So to conclude, embracing and adopting internationally recognized standards such as these are not hard, but it does require a bit of an effort, a bit of enthusiasm, and also a degree of proactiveness and possibly some public scrutiny. And I think if we would be able to achieve that through forums like NetThing and others, I think we can make the Australian internet near instantly a much safer place to connect to do business. With that, I'm looking forward to any questions or comments, and also very happy to take discussions offline and seek partnership with those members of the internet governance community here in Australia to take this dialogue and this conversation about internet security standards forward. Thank you, Terry. That was my talk.
Well, thank you, Bart. We actually do have a question from Michael Robertson. What is the number of site systems in each domain that you have on that slide? And that's a very good question because it would inform us about the data gathering as well.
Yeah, totally. So this is, as I mentioned, just kind of a very small snapshot. So we looked at about 10 federal government domains, about 10 ASX 100 companies that have an Australian domain name, and we looked at about 10 ISPs. So this is, as I mentioned, a bit of a snapshot, but in the next couple of months, we'll have kind of a much broader, sample across about 15 economic sectors to be shared, and obviously that will be a much more representative sample by then. Yeah,
indeed. So, given we're targeting small businesses, what would be the one piece of advice you would give a small business today in plain English language that they should take and implement if they can straight away?
Yeah, so I think that's probably kind of the conversation we may be trying to avoid. So I think one thing is the onus should not be kind of on small and medium businesses. I think the onus should be kind of on their providers. And I think by using a test tool like AUCheck, they can kind of have that conversation or start that conversation, saying, well, why are you not providing me kind of all kind of service offering with all the standards kind of by default included? And there might be good reasons for that not occurring, but at least then we know, then we have kind of a conversation about those good reasons, rather than not doing them kind of by default or unconsciously not doing them.
No, that's interesting advice. It obviously for you, you feel it's an upstream problem, so the problem may actually belong to ISPs and transit providers per se.
Yep.
We still have about 90 seconds. If anyone else has got any other questions, any of the other panelists maybe have a quick question. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next presentation in about 20 seconds time. I do see that we have Mohammed online, who is going to talk to us about the new Bangladeshi internet exchange. But yeah, I think we're getting a few congratulations. So yes, thanks,
That's always
Bart.
good to hear.
Yeah, Cheryl is saying thank you, Bart, as well, and excellent. So our next talk is from Hassan in Bangladesh from Digicon Telecommunications Limited. Hassan is I think, assistant manager or systems admin in that organization. I do know him from attendance at various APNEC events as well, which is good. So I'm hoping, Hassan, if you're available there, you can open up your video and share your slide deck.
Hi. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is it okay?
Excellent. Perfect. We're ready to go. Thank you very much, Hassan. Over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Hi, I am MD Rashid Hassan. I'm from Bangladesh. Now I am working at Digicon Telecommunication. I am working here as a system admin. Today's my presenting topics is tale of a new Bangladeshi NICS. At first, I will discuss about the acknowledgement. This paper is made taking notes, diagram from ethnic training materials and BTFC website. Internet Exchange Point, IXP. What it is? Any place where providers need to exchange traffic. How looks ISPs? ISP's simple diagram is that the ISP switch is in the center position and all ISPs are connected to the ISP switch. Why an ISP? ISPs help reduce the portion of an ISP's traffic that must be delivered via their upstream transit provider, thereby reducing the average per bit delivery cost of their service. ISPs play an essential role in reducing the cost of transit connection over the internet. Who can join an ISP? Requirements are very simple. Any organization which operates their own anonymous network member needs to have their own address space, their own AS number, their own transit arrangement. Members include commercial network operators, academic and resource network, internet infrastructure operators, content providers, content distribution service, broadcaster and media, government information networks. For services offered in ISP, CC, TLD, DNS, root server, Usenet, news, route, collector, looking glass, content redistribution, caching, network time protocol, NICS deployment journey. That means our NICS deployment journey. We have followed this is procedure to deploy NICS. First, study, observation, plan, deployment, configuration, and we have faced many challenges and overcome these challenges. After that, we have taken necessary initiatives to deploy our NICS. Study and assessment. At first, we have learned from BTRC recommended NICS diagram in Bangladesh. In this diagram, we can see that internet data network has international content. It's connected to satellite and it's connected to IIG. And our NICS is connected to this IIG. That means our IIG, Apple Communication. In NICS, domestic contents are available, like domestic contents are available and other ISPs are connected to the NICS. And all users, that means end users are connected to the NICS. And other users are also connected to the NICS. And like this NICS, another NICSs are also connected to IIGs. One monitoring tools are connected to the NICS to monitor all the connectivity. That is a schematic diagram of NICS. In this diagram, you can see that looking glass, CCTLD server, route server, root server, NTP server, and internet client server are connected to L2 switch. That means NICS switch. Administrators are directly connected to the NICS switch. And monitor tools also connected to the NICS switch. All ISP routers are connected as well into the layer 2 switch, that means NICS switch. And other users are connected via ISP router. NICS deployment plan. NICS deployment plan is look like. IIG router is connected to our NICS switch and ISPs are connected to this switch. And we have, we have another switch is for server zone switch for server and services connectivity. We have deployed some servers, IXP manager, route server 1, route server 2, RTB server, CPIX, RPK validator, Looking Glass, NTP server, and NMS server. All servers and services are connected to the server zone switch, and this switch is directly connected to NIC switch to provide the services to ISPs. Deploy route server as a route collector. We have faced several types of challenges to deploy route server. We had two options, device or server, to make the route server. We have chosen server to deploy our route server. There are many daemons to deploy route server. We have chosen BART daemon is best. The standard and works best. It's working fine. That's why we have chosen BART. There are several versions of BART server, like version 1.7, 2.09, and others. We have chosen BART version 2.0. Route server replacement diagram is that we have two route server 1 and route server 2. This is connected to NIC switch, and ISPs are connected also NIC switch. ISP routers are making the BGP session between our route server 1 and route server 2. As a result, ISPs are get the route from route server. After that, ISPs can exchange the traffic between ISP 1 and ISP 2 using this is routes. Two servers are available there for redundancy purpose. We have worried about network security. For this, we have faced challenges to ensure the network security from the attack like DDoS to drop undesirable traffic. To overcome this scenario or this situation, we have two solutions: BGP full expect, RTBS. We have chosen RTBS, and we have deployed RTBS solution here. ISPs are connected to the NIC switch. Route server are also connected to the NIC switch, and RTBS are also connected to the NIC switch. If one attack is come from ISP 1 towards ISP 7, then RTBS, then DDoS detection tools detect this. After the detection, route server change the routing information with BGP community tag and send the route towards all ISP. After that, if one attack is come from ISP 1 towards ISP 7, then the destination will change. And if one attack is come from ISP 1 towards ISP 7, then its destination will change, and this traffic will go to server 1 to RTBS server. After that, RTBS server will acquire this traffic. This traffic will never goes to ISP 7. So we can tell ISP 7 is safe from the DDoS attack. When DDoS detection tools detect that no abnormalities is available right now, no attack is still right now, then route server will share the route again towards all ISP routers. After that, normally all incoming traffic from ISP router 1 towards ISP router 7 is reachable easily with the previous shared routing information. With the details about the working flow. Build up the intercommunication between IPDSP to IPDSP for call forwarding. We have deployed CPIX server and CPIX services here. IPDSPs are connected to our NIC switch, and we know that IPDSP is also connected to subscriber and user is connected to subscriber. If user 1 from subscriber 1 would like to make a call with ISP user Y, then this call is going by using subscriber. After that, it's going to IPTC1, and this goes to NIC switch. After that, NIC switch will forward this call towards IPTC2, and finally IPTC2 forward this call towards the subscriber, and after that, user Y receive the call. As a result, we can reduce the bandwidth, and we can reduce the cost, and we can provide the best efficiency in IPTSP communication between one user to another user. Challenges, we have also faced several challenges here, like unlimited concurrence calls, minimum call setup time, ensure high voice quality all time, ensure high availability. For this, we have taken several types of initiatives to resolve this issue, and we think we have success. Validate BGP prefixes advertised by networks constituting the internet. We have deployed RPKI validator, which is connected to the server zone. By the way, it's connected to the NIC switch. When one route is shared to the route server 1, then route server first check this route with the RPKI validator. Is it valid or not found or invalid? If it is valid, then it's stored into the route server. If it's not valid, then invalid, then not stored into the routing table. If this route is not found, then it also is stored into the routing table. Is the route checking mechanism, RPKI validator, we know that. Looking glass deployment. Looking glass provides you with information related to backbone routing and network efficiency, providing you with the same transparency that customer on a network receive directly. Our looking glass is connected to the server zone as well as NIC switch. NIC server, NTP server deployment. To make the time correct and synchronize automatically, we have deployed NTP server, and it's also connected to the server zone switch, and all servers are synchronizing with the NTP server and maintain the correct time as well. ISP manager deployment, full stack management system, we can call. Is deployed for manage PRs, contact details, and users. Single solution to document everything, switches, ports, cabling, provides statistics and insight to PRs, MRTG, smoke pin, Explo. We have many plans with the NIC server. Our expected plan is that enable BGP full expect also. CCTLD DNS deployment, a map of root server instance. We have already contacted with several type root servers authority, and we have already get the green signal. Hope that we will get a root server instance within short time. At content redistribution or caching service, so we have already contacting as well for caching services, and hope that we also possible capable to include these services into our next environment. And maintain routing registry. That's all. If you have any question, please.
Well, thank you, Hassan. That's actually a really good presentation. I'm actually very pleased to see some of the things you're doing with NICs. It's amazing. We do have a really good question from Narelle Clark, who actually is one of the people who runs IX Australia here in Australia. Narelle wants to know if you see that much DDoS traffic on your exchange.
we have faced some DDoS attack from several sources into our site, and for the IXP era, and we have already deployed RTPS to overcome this DDoS scenario for future basis. It's the we can call that is the preparation or pre-initiative or proactive initiatives to face this DDoS traffic for the IXP environment.
Excellent. Well, our time is up. Look, thank you very much for your presentation. I will get your details from NetThing and follow up about the root servers, because we do have a program here for deploying root servers at APNIC. So I'll have a talk to you about that.
Thank you.
I believe next on our agenda.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for giving me opportunity, and I am really pleased to you all. Thank you very much. Thank you all participant, and thank you all presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, next up, we have Champika, who is with ICANN. He's the Regional Technical Engagement Manager for the Asia Pacific region. And Champika is going to be talking about best practices in securing DNS. Champika, I hope you have a slide deck. If you don't, that's
yes,
not a problem.
I do have, yes.
Thank you very much.
I will share the slides.
Thank you.
Can you see my slides, Terry?
Yes, I can. Excellent. Perfect.
All right, great. Yeah, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. And also thank you very much for NetThing 22 for giving us this opportunity. And so as Terry mentioned, my presentation will focus on the best practices in securing DNS. Now, first of all, speaking of DNS, DNS contains quite a lot of information, wealth of data about your systems. Basically, things like your domain names, your organization's different type of host names, IP addresses, the mail server information, the database location, and things like that. There are quite a lot of information. So this is why it is very important for us to protect the DNS data. Not only the data, of course, but also the DNS infrastructure in general. So the objective of this discussion is about, what are the best practices in trying to secure our DNS infrastructure. Now, just to sort of give a very quick overview of the DNS components. Now, typically, when a DNS query gets resolved, as we all know, we use DNS on a very regular basis. Every time when we send emails, or when we try to browse, or when we use mobile apps and things like that, we always use DNS. So if you see, we have our client device, and we have a stub resolver in our operating system, the client device basically, which will interact with a recursive resolver. So there has to be a party who is operating this recursive resolver. Sometimes we also call this as a recursive server, or even a caching server. The query goes there, and then usually, these recursive resolvers are managed by our ISPs or network operators, mobile operators. There are also public DNS service providers as well. So the query goes there, and then the query from there, the queries would go into authoritative servers. For explanation purposes, here we only show only a single server here, but in the reality, we have multiples of servers that are taking these queries. So DNS is a very hierarchical system, and top of the DNS hierarchy, we have root. And then we have top-level domains like .au, for example, or .com, and so on. There are over 1,500 at the moment. And then we have second-level domains and third-level domains, and so on. So it's a very hierarchical system. So if anyone is managing any of these zones, basically you have to run an authoritative name server. So when you speak of these DNS servers, earlier we were speaking about recursive servers or recursive resolvers, and where the data actually resides, we call it as an authoritative name server, so that the server can give reliable responses to the recursive resolver. And speaking of the root servers, again, the root server, the root has to be secure, stable, and resilient. So this is why we have many root server instances scattered around the world. Again, currently there are over, around 1,500 or so root servers as well, instances scattered around the world. And then TLDs, of course, I explained you earlier, and the second levels and so on. So the responses are being received by the recursive resolver, and then recursive resolver would provide these responses to the client back. So once the responses are given back to the client, the responses are, of course, kept in the caches or the memory in these recursive resolvers, so that the following questions from the same client or other clients that is being served by the same resolver can be answered very quickly. So that's the sort of general setup of a DNS sort of query process. And only thing is actually when you apply the security into this whole mechanism, it is very important that we have to protect every aspect of these transactions. Now, usually in DNS, we expect, okay, a client would go and send a query to a server and then get a response, just like what we discussed before. We expect a query goes into our recursive resolver, and then we expect a response from our recursive resolver. But the question is whether are we really sure whether we are really getting this response from our recursive resolver. Say if you might be trusting your ISP, so you are sending all your queries to your ISP. But the question is it really that all your queries are going to your ISP's recursive resolver? It could be going somewhere else. And so these are the things that you have to be aware of. And the other thing is even the recursive resolver, if they are contacting a root server, for example, or if they are contacting a TLD name server, these queries, are they really going to the correct place? Or are they really getting responses from an evil party, basically? This is where we have lots of security issues in DNS. So there can be some wrong responses that can come from incorrect parties, and then these wrong responses can get cached in these recursive resolvers so that the clients would get wrong responses. So this is where things like cache poisoning could happen. And also, during transit, some of these queries can also be, some of these responses can also be modified. So the integrity of the data can also be lost. So we have to actually think about all these aspects when you think of DNS security. I mean, running DNS is all good. Usually what happens is that when the operators, they run their DNS infrastructure, it's running all good. Some tend to stop at that stage. But it is very important that we go beyond that and see what are the best practices in trying to secure our DNS infrastructure as well, because there are many security mechanisms. By the way, like the DNS protocol was sort of, the initial RFCs were written a long time back, maybe like 40 years ago, early 1980s. So since then, there have been so many of security standards that have been written. And also actually these security standards are in practice. That is also why it is very important for us to apply these standards and then secure our DNS. Now, if you see this diagram, you can see actually the potential target points of a DNS ecosystem. Now, I would say a DNS ecosystem mainly because it's not just one operator or one just single party, because it's a very complex sort of ecosystem that we are talking about. So you have clients, you have resolve operators, you have authoritative server operators, then you have root server operators, then you have registries, then you have registrars, you have registrants, and it's very complex. So to secure our DNS, we have to make sure that all those areas, so all those transactions with all these different parties has to be protected as well. So and also we cannot expect that we'll be handling everything. So whoever the party who is handling any piece of this whole infrastructure, they have to think about their aspect or their perspective, and then try to protect their part of the component. So if you, for example, if you consider here, the stub resolver talking to a recursive resolver, this is of course going in clear text. There can be some man-in-the-middle attacks and things like that. And then from recursive server to authoritative server, similarly, just like what I said before, there could be some, the queries can go into wrong places. And even between these authoritative servers, you can have multiple authoritative servers, like primaries, secondaries, multiple secondaries, and so on. So between those servers, we have to make sure they are consistent, their transactions are all consistent and valid, and so on. And also between the registries and registrars, their communication has to be properly secured as well. Even from client's perspective, like from registrant's perspective, we have to make sure that the interfaces, the credentials, because nowadays there are lots of credential thefts as well. So these interfaces are well secure. In fact, actually, in the previous presentation, the first presentation, Bart was mentioning about different sites and different security standards. We saw that many organizations, actually, they have not really complying with many of these security standards. So that is why it is very important that we have to think about all these aspects as well. Now, I also want to highlight one little thing here, which is actually a standard called DNSSEC. DNSSEC stands for DNS Security Extensions. So DNS Security Extensions, or DNSSEC, is there to protect the DNS data, basically to handle or to protect the authenticity and the integrity of DNS data. Authenticity means, are you getting the right, are you, really if you're requesting for a question, for a response from me, are you really getting it from me? So that's authenticity. And then integrity is whatever I send you is not really modified in the middle, and you get the same stuff that I sent you. So these things are all taken care of by DNSSEC. So if you deploy DNSSEC, if your organization deploy DNSSEC, these, we can eliminate many of these attacks like cache poisoning or DNS hijacking and things like that. We also saw that based on, again, I'm referring to Bart, we also saw that based on the statistics, less percentage of DNSSEC deployments were there, especially like in second level domains. So we really encourage organizations. Of course, .au has deployed since about 9 years ago or so, and then so the second level domains or third level domains in Australia, they can always deploy DNSSEC. They can sign their domains, they can sign their DNS data. And also, if you are a network operator, if you are a mobile operator, you can enable validation in your resolvers. Now, with all this discussion, I just want to also highlight about one of the tools that we have that ICANN has initiated, something called kindness. So this is to promote the DNS operational best practices. Now, kindness has a sort of a long acronym there. I'm not going to read all this, but this is, you may have heard about actually the ISOC manners as well. So this complements also manners because manners, the focus is on the routing aspects, but the kindness, here the focus is actually on the DNS side of it. So so any organization, if you are operating any of those different type of operational aspects that we were talking about, you can always test your situation in kindness. So this is something that I wanted to highlight. So for example, if you are an authoritative operator, so if you're running some TLDs, or if you're running some critical zones, even second level domains and so on, there are some certain best practices. For example, you have to run multiple authoritative servers, or whether you have deployed DNSSEC, or whether you have certain proper access controls, things like that. You can test against that. You can do a self-evaluation. Similarly, if you are a resolve operator, for example, some organizations could be closed and private, in corporate level, they could be running their resolvers, or some organizations like ISPs, mobile operators, and so on, they could be running shared private resolvers, or there could be some public resolve operators as well, which is actually the resolver servers are open to public. So in all these cases, actually, kindness will give sort of, a list of best practices, and it will check against all those best practices. So you can evaluate your organizational environment, your environment, and then get a self-evaluation done. And similarly, the core system as well. I mean, whether you're applying all the cyber hygiene into your core system, like, the BCP 38s and so on. So you can actually get, through kindness, you can get a self-assessment and reports. And again, if anyone wants to try this out, you can still be anonymous, and you can try this out using this tool. And also, but if any organization want to become or want to enroll and participate, that also can be done. And we also encourage that as well, so that you can share your best practices with the other operators as well. So we would encourage this participation, the community participation here. So basically, you become a goodwill ambassador there. Now, to try this out, you can always go to www.kindness.org, kindns.org. And as I said, you can explore this tool as well. You can even initially try it as a self-assessment. You can be anonymous, but then if your organization want to join as a member, you can join and sort of be an ambassador there as well. And there is also a mailing list that we have, kindness discuss at icann.org. You are welcome to participate there as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you to you all, and just wind up my presentation. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Champika. I like that. It's been noted on the chat that the Internet Society has two programs. One is manners and one is kindness. So the hint here is to practice kindness and to start using good manners. I think that's a really good metaphor for what we're trying to achieve here. Now, Narelle actually has a quick question. Does Champika see a role for IXPs in the kindness program, i.e., Internet Association of Australia operate IX Australia with numerous routes and registry operators connected? So that's a very good question. How is that applicable to an IXP who has Anycast root servers connected to it? So is there something we can tell Narelle there about that environment, or does kindness apply?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question, in fact. But of course, in your environment, if you're running a resolver, or if you're running any Anycast authoritative servers and so on, you could still test in that category. And we do not have any specific category for IEX IXP operators as such, but I can always give this feedback to the team that is working on kindness as well, so we can see how we can sort of enhance on that, and that's a good feedback. But again, if you're running some, as I said, if you're running some recursive servers or any authoritative servers at the moment, you could still test based on those.
That's good advice. In fact, maybe we could get Narelle to tell her members about kindness and get them to start looking at using that with their own resolvers as well. Champika, thank you very much. That was a very informative chat. Now we have our last session, again, along with the DNS theme. This time we have Bruce Tonkin, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Auda, and he will be talking about DNS abuse. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Terry. Okay. Oops. Okay, hopefully that screen's now sharing. So first, I thought just start with the definition of DNS abuse, which is commonly used amongst registries and registrars globally. And that's basically four categories. One is phishing, which is where a domain name is typically a misspelling of a well-known brand. You arrive at the website and it looks like the website of a bank, and it's asking you to put in your credentials. And essentially the purpose is to capture your username and password, which they then use with your real bank. Malware, the most common example that people hear about that publicly is ransomware. So this is where you go and visit a website, you inadvertently download software into your computer, which infects the network and tries to do some sort of harm to your computer data typically. And then you pay a ransom for that harm to be removed. Botnets are essentially computers that are used to control some of these activities, particularly denial of service attacks. Farming, you don't see that much of, and it's more something like, I think one of the earlier speakers talked about DNSSEC, but essentially where you're typing in a real domain name, but that domain name gets misdirected to another website. And spam, where it's used in one of the four mechanisms above. So usually phishing is associated with setting up the phishing site and then sending an email and tricking the person to click on a link in that email that takes them to the phishing site, and the same with malware as well. One of the challenges with dealing with DNS abuse is just the number of intermediaries involved in providing internet services. So it's usually multiple companies. Starting with the bottom right, a person that wants to register a domain name typically uses a reseller. That in turn uses registrar, which talks to a domain name registry, which publishes the information in the DNS. And then that same registrant on the bottom right creates some content. They put that onto some sort of content management platform like WordPress. They'll have a web hosting company that hosts that content. And then the user on the top left corner will ask the DNS to get the IP address. Once the user has the IP address, they contact the ISP, and the ISP might in turn connect to a content delivery network of some sort, which is intended to make that information, that content available more quickly. So a lot of parties there. Typically the parties in blue are associated with the DNS resolution, and the parties in red are involved in content. And so generally what I'm talking about in this talk is the activities that the parties in blue take to deal with the DNS abuse side of things. But we don't generally get involved in content. We're not looking at logos on websites or pirated material and the sorts of things that are held by the parties in pink. So there are quite a few global initiatives to tackle DNS abuse. And these are all open sort of multi-stakeholder initiatives. All of these have been done on a voluntary basis by industry participants that are trying to reduce DNS abuse. The first one is a group of registries and registrars got together to define DNS abuse and then help define some procedures for dealing with DNS abuse. The next group, which is out as a member of, which is the DNS Abuse Institute, and I am on the advisory council. They've been developing a few tools. The first tool they've released is a tool to help with reporting abuse, which is NetBeacon. One of the problems that providers like registries and registrars have is they get a lot of people that will say, here's a domain name, we want you to take it down, and they don't provide any further information. And so the purpose of NetBeacon is to capture the information from the user that would be necessary for a registry or a registrar to be able to verify that that abuse is real and to take action. The next initiative from the registrar stakeholder group is actually to help people find the right contact at the right party. And so in that previous diagram I showed there's a number of intermediaries. There are registries, registrars, there's hosting companies, there's ISPs. All of those organisations have abuse contacts that members of the public can contact if they want to raise a technical abuse query. And this tool, which has got an acronym of ACID, is the ACID tool, but effectively you type in a domain name and it will give you a list of abuse contacts associated with the registry, the registrar, the web hosting provider, and the email hosting provider. Next one is a European initiative, which at the moment is mostly collecting statistics about DNS abuse to help policymakers in Europe. And then the last one, again, is something that OUT is heavily involved in, which is working on a survey of practices amongst country code operators to share information on how each of us manages DNS abuse. So I've talked about DNS abuse in general. Talking about it specifically in .au, about 0.03% of .au names are associated with abuse. And this is as, excuse me, this is as reported by ICANN's Domain Abuse Activity Reporting System. So we provide data to ICANN, they accumulate reports from all around the world, and then they calculate a level of abuse. So for .au, they've calculated it as 0.03. Currently, the global average for top level names is about 0.13. So relatively small percentages, but then of course you're dealing with huge numbers. So 0.03% of 4 million names is still a problem that's worth a constant effort to try and reduce. And what we noticed when we've been looking at DNS abuse cases in .au now for about 12 months is most of it is not so much people that are maliciously registering a domain name. Because we have validation processes in .au, we don't get that much of that. So nearly all of the DNS abuse that happens in .au is as a result of not so much abusing the domain registration system, but it's actually hacking the websites of small businesses. And so a typical profile is a small business that's had their website for more than 5 years old. They have not kept their computing environment up to date. Often their content management solutions, such as WordPress, is running a very old version and it's easily hacked. And the mitigation methods, and Bart sort of mentioned in the first talk in this session, is essentially implement good practice IT security, which means regularly patch the operating system that's running the web server, patch the applications like WordPress, use two-factor authentication when you have an account with a registrar or a hosting account. And another last one is be very careful. If you've ever had a domain name and you've used it for email, it's not a good idea to let that name lapse because what another activity is people register domain names that have expired, and they register those names to get control of the email addresses, which they then in turn use to get into things like registrar accounts and hosting accounts and things. So be very careful of keeping your email address protected. So those are sort of things that you can do to protect yourself against DNS abuse. We realise that in many cases, when we're dealing with small businesses, they generally are probably not in control of their IT environment. So usually they'll need to contact someone to either rebuild their website on a safe platform or give the information to their current IT supplier and get them to update their systems. And that's one of the benefits of that AU check tool that Bart was mentioning earlier, is that small businesses could run a check, get a feel for how secure their website is, and provide that information to their IT supplier. If you come across a phishing site or get affected by malware and it's related to a domain name in .au, you can report that directly to Outer. We get very few direct reports of DNS abuse. It would be less than once a month. If we get a direct report, we will investigate it. Essentially what we're trying to do is verify that we can see that the complaint is accurate, and then we'll pass that information on to the registrar and the registrant for action. And again, if you're reporting directly to us, provide as much information as you can about the abuse that you've seen. Mostly where we get our DNS abuse cases from is that we pay for feeds. So we use two platforms to consolidate DNS abuse reports from a wide range of DNS reporting bodies. And examples include sort of Serval, Spamhaus, Anti-Phishing Working Group, and there's lots of these bodies. So we consolidate all those reports and look at them each day. And then we review those reports, try to verify that the phishing is still in play, or verify that the site's still affected by malware. And then we will contact the registrar and the registrant and let them know about it. Generally, we provide all the information we can so that the parties can actually take action. Another thing that I should mention too is that in addition to most of the abuse being targeted at small business websites, The other feature of it is that the targets are generally outside of Australia. And so what they're doing is they're using the trustin.au, which means it doesn't get filtered in other countries. And so, we will see gambling sites in Indonesian that are buried within a small business website in Australia because they're trying to target Indonesian citizens on the basis that the Indonesian ISP trust.au and won't attempt to block it. And we also see a lot of phishing against overseas banks where that bank phishing site's embedded within a small business website in Australia. So it's a very global oriented business DNS abuse. And generally the target of the abuse is often not in the same country as the offending website, and the perpetrator of the abuse is in another country as well. So that is all, and happy to hand back to you, Terry.
So I'm just waiting for some comments to come in on either Q&A or the chat, and no one's biting yet. I think you've answered all their questions, Bruce. Well done.
You're welcome, Terry.
We have a minute left in the session, so I'm thinking if anyone does want to now ask a question, great timing. Otherwise, I'll pop in with one. Look at this, Bruce from Cheryl. Bruce was way too good with his presentation, therefore no one needs to ask questions.
Thanks, Cheryl.
That or it's that late on a Friday afternoon now that everyone.
Yeah, it is. It's getting definitely towards beer o'clock for those that partake.
That's right. Yes, possibly indeed. Look, I think we've done very well with our lightning talks. Thank you very much to our 4 presenters. Obviously, we've been a little bit technical, but we haven't had a highly technical panel in this conference, so it was great to actually have that content here, and very grateful to see something about exchange points, DNS security, and of course security in general, which I think are very close to what we do here at APNIC as well. So absolutely fantastic. So thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Champika. And thank you, Bart, very much. Now, I believe we have a break coming up, and if you are still with us in 15 minutes, we have another panel coming along, and I believe we'll be talking about, of all things, defamation, which I am rather keen to find out about myself. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'll see you all again in approximately 15 minutes.